Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. The four peak lords shot toward the beast-birth flower, panting, trembling inwardly. It was as if they had just caught sight of the most precious treasure in the world. The old woman from Iris Petal Peak suddenly looked as if her face had even more wrinkles than before. The other three peak lords were equally excited as they reached out to actually touch the beast-birth flower. To them, it was something holy, something that completely filled their field of vision, obscuring everything else in existence. The surrounding disciples were struck mute. Most of them didn't even know what a beast-birth seed was, and were struck with fear by the actions of the four peak lords. However, a few of the inner sect disciples knew what they were looking at. That was especially the case considering the words the peak lords had just uttered. Those disciples were completely shaken, their hearts battered by enormous waves of astonishment. Beast-birth flower. Heavens! Is that really the flower of a beast-birth seed? That's a legendary holy object, rarely seen in the world. I've only read about it in the ancient records. Supposedly, they went extinct in ancient times. I can't believe there's one sitting right here. The voices grew louder and louder. The tens of thousands of people present soon realized that the seemingly ordinary, although rather large plant, was actually an indescribably valuable object. Everyone was clamoring about the beast-birth flower, and soon forgot that they had come to cause trouble for Bai Xiaochun. It only took a few moments for the area to get extremely noisy, until finally, the old man from Ghost Fong Peak turned and gave a harsh look to the crowd. Almost instantly, the voices died down. Bai Xiaochun stood off to the side, his chin stuck up into the air, looking very much like a lonely hero. Humph, now do you people understand why I, Bai Xiaochun, needed contributions from so many battle beasts? It was all for my beast-birth flower. Bai Xiaochun's heart was pounding with excitement and pride, but he kept the lonely expression on his face. At the same time, the four peak lords stood there, their expressions going back and forth between enchantment and frustration. In the end though, they were gritting their teeth, and then gnashing them. That was especially true of the old woman from Iris Petal Peak, whose eyes were completely bloodshot. Bai Xiaochun, she cried, sounding both furious and filled with grief. Don't you know how valuable this beast-birth flower is? Don't you know that these things are extinct? Don't you know what this beast-birth flower represents? The old woman was raving as if mad, her heart figuratively dripping with blood, convinced that if she were the one to have come to possess the beast-birth seed, things would have been completely different. Of course I do, Bai Xiaochun answered, surprised. He wouldn't have riled up the entire North Bank if he hadn't been aware of how valuable it was. In the moment of the old woman's sorrow, the other three peak lords looked over at Bai Xiaochun, their gazes as sharp as blades. They knew how indescribably valuable a beast-birth seed was. It was like a precious treasure, and from the way they were looking at Bai Xiaochun right now, they were completely and utterly disappointed. I can't believe you planted such a precious seed right here, the old woman raged. And now the process is almost complete. It's going to give birth to a beast soon. Why you? Bai Xiaochun, it's obvious that your actions led to all the battle beasts in the sect going crazy. But what use was that? All of those beasts had low-order bloodlines. Don't you realize that we could have used that beast-birth seed with Elder Sun's Jasper Sea Monster to give birth to another beast with a third-order bloodline? But now, it's too late. Too late. Bai Xiaochun blinked a few times and then cleared his throat. Elder Sun's Jasper Sea Monster also contributed. Wait, what? The old woman was about to continue her tirade, but instead, her jaw dropped. The other three peak lords had similar reactions as they looked out into the crowd to find Elder Sun looking back at them with a shocked expression on his face. He had come, not because he had noticed any abnormality in his battle beast, but because of the problem with the disciples' beasts. It was only in this moment that he suddenly heard that his own Jasper Sea Monster had come to contribute. After a moment of hesitation, the old woman's fury returned. Even Elder Sun's Jasper Sea Monster would have been a waste of the beast-birth seed. Take Elder Chen's Blue Sky Boa. It only has a third-order bloodline, but it might be able to transform into a dragon one day. Furthermore, that clear Sky Boa is the only one that can. Before she could finish, Bai Xiaochun gingerly interrupted. The Blue Sky Boa also came to contribute. The old woman's eyes went wide. Out in the crowd, Elder Chen gasped and looked down at this bag of beast raising. In that moment, a blue snake stuck its head out and looked in the direction of the beast-birth flower, seemingly drunk with passion. Elder Chen's blue sky boa is still strong and young, said the Peak Lord from Ghostfong Peak, his voice quavering with rage. We can breed it even without a beast-birth seed. Bai Xiaochun, my own Yaksha beast is perfectly suited for a beast-birth seed. If only you. Peak Lord Wu, your Yaksha beast, also came to contribute. Peak Lord Wu wasn't the only one to gasp. All of the surrounding disciples were completely shocked by what they were hearing. The other Peak Lords were about to say more, when Bai Xiaochun edged back a few steps and then carefully said, all of your beasts came to contribute. The 4 Peak Lords felt as if they were being struck by lightning. How could they have been completely unaware that their own battle beasts secretly came here? Simultaneously, the surrounding disciples were left gasping to the point where they couldn't remain silent any longer. Heavens, how many beasts came to contribute? This Bai Xiaochun, he didn't even let the Peak Lord's beasts off the hook. How deranged. As the shouting of the crowd grew louder, Bai Xiaochun started to get nervous, and backed up a bit more, keeping his eyes on the 4 Peak Lords the entire time. After a moment passed, the old woman from Iris Betel Peak intensified her glare. Well, it seems I underestimated you, Bai Xiaochun. You even managed to sneak all of the Peak Lord's battle beasts over here. Well then, why did you stop there? Why didn't you bring over the 7-colored phoenix from Iris Betel Peak? Our battle beasts have 3rd-order bloodlines, but the 7-colored phoenixes is 4th order. A 4th-order bloodline would definitely not be a waste of. Before she could finish speaking, she noticed the cautious expression on Bai Xiaochun's face, and her heart flip-flopped. You didn't. The 7-colored phoenix also came to contribute, Bai Xiaochun said, sounding a bit wronged. What about the 3-eyed raven from Archway Peak? Also contributed, Bai Xiaochun said, steeling himself. Plus the lizard from Archway Peak, and the mountain ghost from Ghostfong Peak. They all came to contribute. The Peak Lord's eyes went wide, and they gasped in disbelief. Moments later, they produced jade slips, and used some unknown method to communicate with the spirit beast guardians. A moment later, the information was confirmed, although the spirit beast guardians didn't dare to mention the Heavenhorn Ink Dragon. Afterward, the Peak Lords stared at Bai Xiaochun with wide eyes, looking completely incredulous. The surrounding North Bank disciples were also left gasping in shock. Beihan Lai shivered, more convinced than ever of how strong Bai Xiaochun was. Xu Song's mind was spinning. He was well aware of how terrifying the 4 spirit beast guardians were, and couldn't imagine how Bai Xiaochun could possibly have convinced them to offer contributions. The old woman from Iris Betel Peak felt like she was going crazy. She had started out with the intention of teaching Bai Xiaochun a lesson, but the more she spoke, the more she realized she had nothing to say. Bai Xiaochun knew how valuable a beast-birth seed was, and had even managed to get the most powerful beasts on the North Bank to contribute. Even if she had tried to do such a thing, she might not have been able to pull it off. However, considering that there were so many disciples watching, all of them completely speechless because of Bai Xiaochun's explanations, the old woman's anger grew. Flicking her sleeve, she said, still a waste. Bai Xiaochun, don't you know that if you had given that beast-birth seed to one of the prime elders, even the patriarchs would have been shocked? They could have issued a dharmic decree to arrange for the sect's holy beast guardian, the Heavenhorn Ink Dragon, to use that seed to give birth to a new generation. Now that would most certainly have not been a waste. At first, she started getting more and more worked up into a rage, but eventually realized that Bai Xiaochun appeared to be trying to cut in, and stopped talking. Then her heart began to pound. She wasn't the only one. The expression on Bai Xiaochun's face caused the other 3 Peak Lords to suck in deep breaths. Bai Xiaochun blinked a few times, and then quietly said, well, I don't think we need to bother the patriarchs to get a dharmic decree. Senior Heavenhorn Ink Dragon came over 3 days ago. He was more than happy to help, and even contributed more than 50 times. The entire area was as silent as death. The 4 Peak Lords were dumbstruck, as were the elders and the disciples. Everyone was staring at Bai Xiaochun, their hearts pounding with astonishment that could shake the heavens and topple the earth. It was at that point that the beast-birth flower suddenly began to wither, and one after another, petals began to fall off. A powerful life force essence appeared within the flower, which grew stronger and stronger by the moment. It didn't take long before the Peak Lords, the elders, and the ordinary disciples were all paying rapt attention to the flower. The spirit beast guardians of the 4 mountain peaks were all trembling, as if they could sense their own progeny, and countless ordinary battle beasts were all trembling with a similar sensation. Deep within the ancient beast chasm, the heavenhorn ink dragon opened its eyes and looked out into the beast conservatory with an expression of keen anticipation. Bai Xiaochun stood off to the side nervously, wondering how things would turn out. The peak lords were close by him, breathing in ragged pants. Slowly, the beastbirth flower continued to wither, and the life force aura grew stronger, as if something were about to burst out from inside. At this point, a vortex appeared up above, slowly spinning round and round, almost as if there were eyes above in the heavens, looking down at the scene playing out below. By this point, virtually everyone on the north bank was paying close attention to the events playing out in the beast conservatory. Numerous eyes from Mount Deoseed were also watching. That's, huh? Even as expressions of surprise rang out, suddenly, the vortex up above turned crimson, causing the entire sky to turn red. A blood-curdling shriek then emanated from within the withered beastbirth flower. Simultaneously, the powerful aura suddenly began to decline. If that process was completed, it would indicate that whatever was inside the flower had died. It would expire prematurely, never even having a chance to be born. Bai Xiaochun began to tremble, and the 4 peak lords were all astonished. It has a heterogeneous bloodline. Its mind is having trouble keeping its body in one piece. Damn it, I knew this was going to happen. That beast will never see the light of day. Even as the 4 peak lords expressed their shock, Bai Xiaochun trembled and stared at the beastbirth flower. He could sense that the life inside wished to emerge, but that it wasn't able to. It was now hovering on the brink of dying, and even exuded a powerful aura of death. Suddenly, a blurry figure appeared in the air above the beastbirth flower. It was impossible to see him clearly, but he seemed to be an old man in a white robe. He hovered there calmly, completely devoid of any aura whatsoever. His cultivation base was completely unreadable. Everyone was shaken mentally. The numerous disciples present had never seen this old man before, but the peak lords had, and they were left completely astonished. Their eyes went wide, and they dropped to their knees to kowtow. 3rd-generation patriarch. When the disciples heard that, their minds spun, and they also dropped down and kowtowed. Bai Xiaochun was somewhat in a daze, and didn't even notice the newcomer. His attention was completely focused on the life inside the withered beastbirth flower, his heart trembling, tears welling up in his eyes. The white-robed old man looked over at the flower, and then his right hand flashed with an incantation gesture as he sent life force pouring inside. However, a moment later, the aura of death became even stronger than before. Muttering something inaudible, the white-robed old man turned to look in the direction of the ancient beast chasm. There, the heavenhorn ink dragon opened its mouth, and a golden drop of blood flew out, causing the dragon to age visibly. At the same time, Heavenhorn looked at the beastbirth flower with anxious anticipation. The golden drop of blood streaked through the air like a golden beam of light, all the way to the beastbirth flower. The white-robed old man sighed. Eyes shining brightly, he performed a double-handed incantation gesture, causing the clouds in the sky to churn and form together into a magical symbol, which merged with the golden drop of blood as it entered the beastbirth flower. With a heterogeneous bloodline, its chances of survival are minimal, the old man said. This will sustain it for 9 days at the most. Whether or not it lives and manages to fight its way out of the beastbirth flower is up to the willpower of the beast itself. What a pity. After all, it would appear that it's a spirit creature with a 5th-order bloodline. Even this old man couldn't completely defy the heavens and alter fate. The beast's fate rested completely on its own fortune. He glanced over at Bai Xiaochun, a look of pity in his eyes, then swished his sleeve and faded away into motes of glittering light. After he left, the 4 peak lords slowly rose to their feet. After staring reverently at the spot where the old man had disappeared, they turned to look at Bai Xiaochun, who was still standing there blankly next to the beastbirth flower. All of them seemed somewhat disturbed. Anyone who had worked as hard as Bai Xiaochun had, only to find that the battle beast might not be born, would be upset. That was especially true considering how rare beastbirth seeds were in the cultivation world. The 4 peak lords sighed. Their anger toward Bai Xiaochun had vanished, and they slowly began to make their way off into the distance. Neither could the North Bank disciples cause problems for Bai Xiaochun considering the sudden turn of events. Although many of them were still angry, they simply turned and quietly left. Soon, evening had fallen, and Bai Xiaochun was the only person left in the beast conservatory. He stood there staring blankly at the withered beast birth flower, and the tiny figure struggling inside. The creature seemed to be fighting an epic battle for its life. Tears began to roll down Bai Xiaochun's cheeks as he slowly took a step forward and sat down next to the beast birth flower, then reached out to place his hand on its surface. The grief he was feeling was plainly visible on his face, he just couldn't quite make himself accept that this was happening. At the moment, he felt no desire to see the ultimate battle beast. He just wanted the little life form inside of the flower to live, even if it wasn't powerful at all. He had given life to this creature, and the idea of watching it die was as painful as having a sword stab into his heart. Even worse was that there was nothing he could do. He was in the 10th level of chi condensation, and yet was powerless. That feeling left him feeling suffocated and helpless. Night fell. The helplessness of watching the life of the creature fading away left Bai Xiaochun trembling in fear. He couldn't help but think back to life in the village, when his parents were sick and ailing. They had clasped him by the hand and told him to keep on living. Those 3 words would exist eternally within Bai Xiaochun's mind. Keep on living, he said softly, tears glistening on his cheeks. You have to keep on living. Don't die, bruiser. He gently rubbed the spot on the flower where the little creature's body bulged out slightly. When he called it by name, the tiny thing seemed to recognize his aura and moved slightly. Hang in there, you haven't even seen the world yet. I've never even had a chance to see you. I want to take you to see everything in the cultivation world. Keep hanging in here. Bai Xiaochun's softly spoken words were filled with determination. He kept talking throughout the night, continuing to rub the bulge that was the little creature. He was doing the only thing he could, staying by the creature's side, encouraging it, praying. Dawn broke, then it was noon and evening. Eventually, the moon was shining up above. The first day passed, and the struggling of the little creature in the beast birth flower was getting weaker. However, it hadn't given up. Its heterogeneous bloodline made it difficult to keep its body from falling to pieces, but it was trying hard. Bai Xiaochun forgot about everything else. The only thing he cared about was the little creature in the beast birth flower. He whispered to it, caressed it softly, and poured his heart and soul into encouraging it. He never stopped talking, and even began to send his own spiritual power into the flower. He wasn't sure if it would do any good, but he tried anyway. Gradually, the second day came and went. Then the third day, and the fourth. Bai Xiaochun never rested. His eyes were soon completely bloodshot, and his spiritual power had long since begun to run dry. Every time the least bit of spiritual power built up within him, he would send it into the beast birth flower. That spiritual power was filled with his blessings, his sorrows, and with comfort. He never stopped talking, never stopped offering encouragement. Whenever the little creature started struggling, and began to wail in pain, Bai Xiaochun's soothing voice would cause it to calm down. However, despite all that, Bai Xiaochun was devastated to find that the tiny creature's aura was growing weaker and weaker, while the aura of death grew stronger and stronger. Bruiser, he murmured, you know, back when I was young, when my dad and mom were still around, I wasn't very scared of dying. In fact, I didn't even really know what death was. Once you're feeling better, I'll take you to see Uncle Li. He treats me really well, just like a father. He began to tell stories about himself, about his past, about life in the village, and things about the sect. Late into the night of the fourth day, the spirit beast guardians of the four mountains, and even Heavenhorn deep in the chasm, all sighed and looked away from Bai Xiaochun and the beast birth flower. However, in the darkness of that night, there was a big black dog that appeared outside the honor guard station. It walked into the rear courtyard and sat down next to Bai Xiaochun. Expression one of grief, it looked at the little life inside the beast birth flower, then reached out and licked the flower. Another day passed. On evening of the fifth day, Bai Xiaochun was exhausted. To him, the past 5 days had left him feeling as tired as if he had ceaselessly concocted medicine for 5 months. And yet, he had no intention of giving up. He continued to offer comfort and encouragement. He never stopped talking. Unfortunately, the little creature only continued to weaken. Deep in the night of the 5th day, it suddenly struggled fiercely for a few moments, then started twitching. After a moment, it stopped moving, and the aura of death spread out to completely cover Bai Xiaochun and the black dog. Bai Xiaochun placed his hand onto the spot where the tiny creature bulged out of the flower. Tears streaming down his face, he shouted, "Live! You have to live! When the Luokan clan was trying to chase me down, 10 people tried to kill me, but I kept on living. They tried to kill me, so I killed them. I even broke my own arm for a chance to stay alive. You have to do the same thing. Live, keep on living. Even as he shouted, he poured spiritual power into the flower. A moment later, the motionless little creature trembled and began to struggle again. As the moments passed, the struggling grew more intense, as if its desire to live were growing even stronger because of Bai Xiaochun's encouragement. Bai Xiaochun wiped the tears off of his face and shouted, "If you want to live, you have to fight for it. Take control of your body. Break out of that flower." The little creature began to struggle even harder, letting out little whimpering sounds as it did. Every time it struggled, it felt pain, and was left trembling. And yet, it didn't give up. It was as if an intense willpower was supporting it, a willpower that continued to grow stronger, something that exceeded its desire merely to live. That power was the most important thing in its life. You're the ultimate battle beast. We're gonna be partners for life. I made you, I raised you, and I'm not gonna let you die. By this point, Bai Xiaochun's voice was hoarse from the yelling, and he almost seemed to have gone mad. For the past 5 days, he had been offering encouragement to this little creature, and finally, it stopped whimpering. Instead, it let out a little roar. Although the sound of it was weak, it was still a roar. Simultaneously, its fading life force suddenly burned as hot as fire. It exploded majestically, and up above, clouds began to churn and seethe. It was as if the little creature's willpower was allowing it to finally fight for its life again. The fluctuations emanating out attracted the attention of others on the north bank. Numerous disciples were shocked, and the 4 astonished peak lords began to rush in the direction of the beast conservatory. It was the same with the ordinary disciples. Faces flickering, they raced over toward the beast conservatory as the life force in the beast birth flower began to surge with power. As for the cloud cover up above, it was growing thicker by the moment. The spirit beast guardians, Heavenhorn, and even many eyes from Mount Deoseed were watching. Even the shadowy, white-robed old man looked on, although no one could see him. The 5th day passed, and the 6th day arrived. By this point, the roars of the creature in the beast birth flower had reached a heaven-shaking, earth-shattering level. The energy surging out from the flower caused the exhausted Bai Xiaochun to stagger backward until he was leaning up against the wall of the courtyard. Even the big black dog was pushed back. Rumbling sounds could be heard as the side of the beast birth flower was ripped open by razor-sharp claws that seemed capable of shredding even the air itself. Flames flickered around the claws, and anyone who was able to see them was completely shocked. Then, the claws ripped the flower open even more, and finally, a little beast appeared. He looked like a horse, a dog, a lizard, a crocodile, and a dragon. His head had a long horn, and his back had a crest of white hair running down it. His body was covered with black scales, and he had sharp teeth. Currently, his eyes were tightly closed. The white-robed old man up in midair looked on with a strange gleam in his eyes, his heart trembling. He had never imagined that the scrappy little creature would actually manage to stay alive. From the look of it, the creature had unlimited potential, and even the chance to increase its bloodline order. Deep in the ancient beast chasm, the Heavenhorn ink dragon suddenly opened its eyes, and the 4 spirit beast guardians trembled. All of the battle beasts on the north bank were shaking. Everyone looking on was left gasping. Anyone with eyes could tell at a glance that this little beast was far beyond ordinary. The 4 peak lords all gasped, and their eyes shone with strange light. It can unleash a magical technique from birth, and its claws emanate flames. That means, it has a 6th order bloodline. Heavens! A spirit creature with a 6th order bloodline has actually appeared in the Spirit Stream sect. It's a future holy beast guardian of the North Bank. Ha ha ha! The North Bank has finally produced a spirit creature that surpasses the Heavenhorn ink dragon. A 6th order bloodline. People involuntarily rushed forward to get a closer look, blocking Bai Xiaochun's view, as he was still leaning up against the wall. He didn't care. He was just happy that Bruiser had made it through his ordeal. He chuckled. As long as you're alive. The little beast's eyes suddenly opened, and he glared around. They were charming eyes, filled with intelligence, as well as flickering black flames. Clearly, the creature was looking for something. The first action he took after opening his eyes very significant, and although none of the disciples understood, the white-robed old man was mentally shaken. It's looking for. Because of the crowd, the little beast was apparently unable to find what he was looking for and started to get anxious. Seemingly angry, he began to let out little roars. It was at that moment Bai Xiaochun pushed himself off the wall. Exhausted, but excited and happy, he threaded through the crowd toward the little beast. "Bruiser," he called softly. Instantly, the little beast shivered, and then turned his glittering eyes toward the place where Bai Xiaochun was pushing through the crowd. The little beast's gaze softened, and a gleam of joy could be seen therein, as if he were looking at his closest relative. He had found what he was looking for. Apparently, the willpower which had sustained his final struggle to break out of the beast-birth flower had been born from the desire to open his eyes and gaze upon the person who had warmly comforted him, who had soothed him during his difficult struggle. That was enough. Such emotions, such willpower, exceeded the desire to simply live. As of this moment, it was clear that to Bruiser, the only thing that mattered in this strange new world was Bai Xiaochun. No matter how many people were in between them, all Bai Xiaochun had to do was speak, and all those other people would disappear. To Bruiser, Bai Xiaochun was everything. Up in midair, the white-robed old man sighed. He knew that this creature would never accept any other master, not for its entire life. Even if someone tried to force it to do so, its dependence on Bai Xiaochun was part of its blood, and would always be a powerful hindrance. In this world, it would only have one master, for all eternity. Bai Xiaochun. Even if Bai Xiaochun perished one day, the beast would never, ever forget him. There was no bonding magic at work, the two of them had a deep relationship that surpassed any such bond. The white-robed old man shook his head and looked deeply at Bai Xiaochun, musing to himself that he deserved to have such a relationship. He had created this battle beast, and during the most dangerous period of its life, had stayed by its side, constantly encouraging it. Perhaps the only thing that could truly move a sixth-order bloodline battle beast to accept someone is the kind of pure-hearted sincerity this kid has. He didn't have any schemes, just a strong desire that the beast keep on living. I hope that this kid can remain pure-hearted like this for the rest of his life. Hopefully no unexpected event changes that heart of his, years down the line. The man turned to leave, looking somewhat melancholy as he thought back to how pure and inexperienced he had been when he took his first steps into the world of cultivation. Eventually, the crowds began to depart. The female disciples were reluctant to leave, the little beast's wide, charming eyes were completely captivating. However, the beast didn't spare a single glance for the female disciples. The peak lords looked enviously at the newborn little beast, and then reluctantly left. Soon, the beast conservatory was quiet. Bai Xiaochun was left alone with the newly born beast and the big black dog, which had also been shoved off to the side by the crowd earlier. Bai Xiaochun was grinning from ear to ear as he petted the little creature's head. It had the body of a horse, the head of a dragon, black reptilian scales, the clawed feet of a pangolin, and even more shocking, its teeth emanated a seven-colored glow. As for its solitary horn, it looked just like the heaven-horn ink dragon's, long and sharp. If you looked closely, you could find things about it that were similar to other animals. Apparently, things had ended up exactly as Bai Xiaochun wanted. The best parts of countless battle beasts had formed together into a completely unique and unheard of living being. From now on, you are Bai Xiaochun's battle beast. Don't worry, I'm going to take you everywhere in the cultivation world. Laughing, he petted Bruiser's head, who lay there next to him, looking up at him with wide, charming eyes. The black dog hurried over as well. It always had its guard up, and would never forget its hatred for Bai Xiaochun, but with Bruiser here, its expression was both protective and fearful at the same time. Bruiser looked over curiously at the dog, and after a moment, seemed to accept it. Time passed. During the following month, Bai Xiaochun frequently took Bruiser out of the Beast Conservatory on walks around the north bank. He would lead the way, and Bruiser would follow along, looking around curiously at his surroundings. The black dog would trail behind in secret, watching protectively over Bruiser. When passing disciples caught sight of Bai Xiaochun, and then Bruiser, their expression were those of amazement, jealousy, and other mixed emotions. Many of the female disciples were immediately taken in by Bruiser's charming appearance. Bruiser was a little nervous at first, and stuck very closely to Bai Xiaochun, who walked along with his hands clasped proudly behind his back. My little Bruiser is beloved by all, he thought. He gets that from me. Clearing his throat, he took Bruiser to many of the crowded places on the north bank. The eyes of so many disciples on him caused his heart to swell with pride and happiness. Sticking his chin up, he took Bruiser here and there, until he was familiar with the whole north bank. Gradually, Bruiser's fear and nervousness faded away, and he began to frolic along happily when they went on their walks. However, he tried to keep his chin stuck up in the air, apparently in imitation of Bai Xiaochun. Even the look in his eye was one of loftiness and pride. He almost seemed to be showing off, as if he wasn't afraid of anything in the world as long as Bai Xiaochun was there. The sight of it left passing disciples quite shocked. Soon, it became apparent that Bruiser had a strange personality. When he realized people were looking at him, and if he was in a good mood, he would simply start stamping back and forth in irritation. If he was in a bad mood, he would bare his teeth and let out a fierce roar. During the month that passed, Bruiser grew relatively slowly. However, in terms of his speed, power, and the strength of his bite, whenever he had a chance to show them off, people were completely shocked. Actually, his speed was on equal footing with the black dog, and he was powerful enough to knock the 30-meter-long pangolin from the beast conservatory back a few meters. In terms of intelligence, he had already reached a shocking level. He was now as smart as a teenaged human, and in many ways, even smarter than that. To Bai Xiaochun's delight, Bruiser was adept at controlling fire. Furthermore, the flames which emanated from his feet grew more intense, especially when he was moving quickly. The flames were currently black, like the fires of the underworld. Because of his fantastic nature, and his charming appearance and wide eyes, even the elders and peak lords doted on Bruiser. They would often send over gifts of spirit medicines and foods suitable for battle beasts. However, as Bruiser grew older, Bai Xiaochun discovered something very odd. There was an eccentric strangeness to his personality. Currently, Shu Song was standing on the path up ahead of Bai Xiaochun, looking at Bruiser, who was roaring at him, all the scales on his body standing on end, black flames surging out beneath his feet. Shu Song was shocked. All he had done was look over at Bruiser, who had almost instantly lost his temper and seemed to be on the verge of biting him. Bai Xiaochun, he said, annoyed, your battle beast is. But then he thought about how much the elders and peak lord doted upon Bruiser, and he backed up a few steps. Before he could even finish speaking, Gongsun Wanner appeared, coming from the other direction. Bruiser, who had just been baring his fangs and brandishing his claws, looked over at Gongsun Wanner, and his eyes glittered. Looking more charming than ever, he eagerly rushed over toward her. He began to follow alongside her as she walked, yipping meekly and wagging his tail like a dog. When he brushed up against her leg, she smiled, then knelt down and picked him up in her arms. Bruiser's eyes shone brightly as he buried himself in Gongsun Wanner's chest and wriggled around back and forth. Gongsun Wanner laughed, and from the expression on Bruiser's little face, he was clearly enjoying himself. Shu Song's eyes went wide, and Bai Xiaochun chuckled wryly. During the past half-month or so, he had noticed that Bruiser would always bare his fangs at the male disciples, seemingly ready to bite them without hesitation if they touched him. However, when it came to the female disciples, he would always act very charming and couldn't wait to be held in their embrace. Bai Xiaochun wasn't sure why this was, and could only attribute it to Bruiser's bloodline. The only explanation that made sense was that he had inherited this hobby somehow. This behavior only continued to intensify, to the point where it was a bit preposterous. Bruiser would treat the male and female disciples completely differently. The male disciples were left speechless, and many of them even began to envy Bruiser. As for the female disciples, he had already rubbed up against more than half of them. If that were all there were to the matter, it might not have been a big deal. But soon, Bai Xiaochun went into secluded meditation to break through to the great circle of the 10th level of qi condensation. During that time, Bruiser's hobbies changed. The black dog would often take it to the places on the north bank where the female disciples would bathe, and they would look on in secret. The black dog only found it mildly interesting, but Bruiser quickly grew addicted. Eventually, he became familiar with the bathing routines of the female disciples, and would excitedly rush out of the beast conservatory in the morning, and wouldn't return until the sky was dark. It was hard to say how many female disciples he could see bathing during a full day. Of course, Bai Xiaochun was focused on his secluded meditation and the advancement of his cultivation base, so he didn't pay much attention to what was happening. Another month passed, and Bruiser's habits changed yet again. In addition to being held in the close embrace of the female disciples and secretly watching them bathe, he developed a new taste. When watching the female disciples bathe, he would secretly take away their bras, and then hide them in a safe location. 1. Eventually, the female disciples realized that a lot of their bras were going missing, and it reached the point where virtually all of them had experienced such a thing. Of course, Bruiser was very fast, and the black dog was also there to keep watch. Therefore, during its month of bra-stealing activities, not a single clue was left behind. Considering how cute Bruiser was, not a single female disciple ever suspected him. A sex maniac has appeared on the North Bank. He specializes in stealing the female disciples' bras. Damn it, it's definitely some sex fiend. Junior sister son has already lost 10 bras. I already did some looking into the matter, and according to my calculations, several thousand bras have already gone missing. This person really has some unique taste. He isn't destroying them, he's collecting them. Find him. We definitely have to find him. The situation with the missing bras got worse and worse. Eventually, the female disciples joined forces in their anger, and began to scour the entire North Bank for clues. They even got assistance from the battle squirrel of one of the elders from Archway Peak, who was adept at performing searches. The entire North Bank was under intense scrutiny, and even many male disciples joined the effort, filled with righteous indignation. They searched all 4 mountain peaks, as well as many other locations. Eventually, someone suggested going to the Beast Conservatory. Before long, a horde of disciples was making their way in that very direction. Meanwhile, Bai Xiaochun was in the honor guard station, fully focused on his meditation, reveling in the wonderful feeling of his cultivation base rising. 1. The undergarment referred to here is a dudu, a traditional Chinese bra that more resembles a bodice than a modern bra. It was at about this time that a hubbub of voices rose up outside the honor guard station. Confused, Bai Xiaochun pushed open the door, and saw a host of North Bank disciples congregated outside of the spell formation. He edged backward, his face flickering as he tried to figure out what he might have done to cause something like this. However, even after a long moment of thought, he had no clue what might have gotten the North Bank into such a commotion. Despite not being sure what was going on, he started to get nervous, and immediately called out, "What are you people doing?" Instantly, the disciples locked their gazes on him standing there on the other side of the spell formation. "Sect Uncle Bai, please open the spell formation so we can come inside and perform a search. We're not just searching here, we're searching everywhere on the North Bank. During the past month, a lot of female disciples have had their bras go missing. A sex maniac is on the loose. If you're innocent, then there's no reason not to open the spell formation and let us perform a search. HMPH, even if they're hidden in a bag of holding, we have our ways of finding them." Bai Xiaochun sighed, and immediately felt a lot better. In fact, he even started to get a bit angry. Clasping his hands behind his back, he looked out at the North Bank disciples. For once, he knew that was on the side of right, and there was no way he would just give in to their demands so easily. Looking out with righteous anger, he said, "Quit making such a scene. I'm a prestige disciple, the junior brother of the sect leader, I would never do something like that. It was definitely you. In all the North Bank, you're the only person who could do something like this." That's right, Bai Xiaochun is the most suspicious of all. He already secretly took other disciples' battle beasts away for contributions. That's the perfect example to show how skilled he is. The junior and elder sisters' bras were all stolen without anyone detecting a single thing. Looking at the clamoring crowd, Bai Xiaochun chuckled coldly and then waved his sleeve, opening the spell formation. "Very well, then. You may enter and perform your search. When you come up empty-handed in a few moments, I'll be very curious to see how you'll compensate me for this little charade." Bai Xiaochun felt utterly calm, and completely in the right. His pure and unwavering confidence got many in the crowd to doubt their suspicious. After all, they had absolutely no evidence to support their claim. Then, Bai Xiaochun suddenly opened the spell formation. At first they just stood there exchanging awkward glances, but then the female disciples whose bras had been stolen gritted their teeth and stepped inside. First they clasped hands toward Bai Xiaochun, then began to search around. One of the female disciples even procured a crimson squirrel from her bag of beast raising. The instant the squirrel appeared, it let out a high-pitched shriek and burst into motion. Everyone in the crowd was taken aback. During the past several days of searching for the missing bras, they had relied on this special squirrel to help them. It had a very acute sense of smell, and would be able to detect even the slightest whiff of its target, even if it were in a bag of holding. Moments ago, many in the crowd had been wavering in their determination, but now their eyes went wide, and they rushed into the area protected by the spell formation. Bai Xiaochun looked on blankly, truly confused by what was happening. He also followed along with the crowd, until the squirrel reached one of the side rooms in the honor guard station. When the door was pushed open, a whooshing sound could be heard as a cascade of brightly colored bras of all types spilled out, thousands of them. Bai Xiaochun, are you still gonna try to convince us you didn't do it? So, it was you after all. Bai Xiaochun, why you? You are so completely shameless. As for the male disciples in the crowd, their rage burned particularly hot. Bai Xiaochun gasped, and instantly began to shiver. Impossible, he shrieked. Even as the words left his mouth, the female disciples' gazes came to fall upon him, and they seemed to contain bloody murder. Bai Xiaochun's scalp went numb, and he immediately tried to offer an explanation. I really didn't do it. I had no idea those were there. Swallowing hard, he began to back up, feeling more wrong than ever. He really wasn't sure how to explain the situation. The female disciples were glaring at him furiously, and some of them were even starting to perform incantation gestures, as if they were going to attack him right on the spot. Damn it, what's going on, he thought, feeling like he was going mad. He had spent all his recent time in secluded meditation, focused completely on cultivation. He hadn't even left the honor guard station, nor had he even opened the door to the side room. It was at that point that he looked out and noticed Bruiser running along, holding a red bra between his teeth, looking intoxicated. However, before he reached the spell formation, Bruiser suddenly stopped in his tracks. When he saw the mob that had formed, he quickly dropped the red bra. At that same moment, countless eyes turned to look in his direction. As for Bai Xiaochun, he immediately felt a headache coming on. After all, no other disciple could go in and out of the spell formation while Bai Xiaochun was in secluded meditation. Not even the big black dog could do that. The only one who could freely enter or exit the spell formation was Bruiser. Bruiser began to tremble, not out of fear of the anger of the other disciples, but because he feared getting Bai Xiaochun mad. Bruiser seemed to be on the verge of tears as he prostrated himself on the ground and began to whimper. Strange expressions appeared on the faces of the disciples and the mob. As for the female disciples, they almost couldn't believe their eyes. Inside and outside the honor guard station, everything was completely silent. After a long moment passed, one of the female disciples murmured, Bruiser wouldn't do something like this. He's so cute, someone must have put him up to it. Immediately, people began to echo her words. Yeah, Bruiser is way too charming and pure. Someone must have put a spell on him and forced him to do it. It was Bai Xiaochun, he's Bruiser's master. It didn't take long before almost all of the female disciples were convinced, and looked over angrily at Bai Xiaochun. Although some people knew the truth, Bruiser was normally so cute, and currently looked so scared, that he had won over the hearts of all present. However, the situation was simply too odd, so those disciples didn't say anything. Instead of causing any further trouble, the disciples glared at Bai Xiaochun, then made their way off. Soon, things quieted down again, and Bai Xiaochun took a deep breath and stared up into the sky, looking like he was about to cry. Considering the blank look in his eyes, Bruiser knew that he had made a mistake. He quietly slunk over to Bai Xiaochun and started rubbing up against his legs. Bai Xiaochun sighed and knelt down to pat his head. Bruiser, you're usually so smart. How could you have been so dumb this time? You can steal bras if you want, but you can't screw me over in the process. I created you. I'm kind of like your father. You definitely can't screw your father over. Okay, remember, don't screw over the people who are close to you. As for all those bras, hiding them in that room isn't gonna work. You can't hide stuff like that in your own home. Silly Bruiser. You have to be a bit smarter. Think things out ahead of time, and make sure you don't get caught. Bruiser bowed his head and whimpered a bit, aware of his mistake. Seeing him act in such a way softened Bai Xiaochun's heart, and he decided not to reprimand him any further. With that, he returned to the honor guard station, a bit down, but just as focused on meditation and cultivation. Outside in the courtyard, Bruiser lay there whimpering for a bit. But then, a fierce look appeared in his eyes as he glared off in the direction of the North Bank disciples. When the night was dark, he crawled to his feet and then vanished, headed out to the North Bank. The following morning, as the first rays of dawn were just beginning to spread out, miserable shrieks could be heard coming from one of the disciples' residences. Damn it, who was it? Who stole my beast spirit pill? I had a hard time getting my hands on that pill. I was gonna give it to my battle beast to advance his level. As soon as the cry rang out, more similar cries could be heard. Ag, my myriad spirit grass. I've been growing it for 5 years, and now the only things left are the roots. Gone. All gone. Somebody ate it up. A thief. This is unbelievable. All of the battle beast food in my immortals cave is gone. That was 3 years worth of food. Heavens. It was just yesterday that I finally got that third order bloodline beast bone from Elder Lee. I was going to extract the bloodline power from it, but now it's gone. Gone. Similar cries could be heard in both the outer and inner sects. In the end, several hundred people were crying out in anger. Without exception, all of them were male, and all of them had been to the honor guard station the day before. As they cried out in pain and anger, they suddenly caught sight of Bruiser, running along with a blood-colored bone in his mouth, crushing it to pieces. A miserable scream rose up from one disciple. His hair was disheveled, and his eyes bloodshot as he wept, seemingly crazed. No, I borrowed that third-order bloodline beast bone from an elder. Ag, don't eat it. Crunch crunch. Holding his head proudly, Bruiser was a blur that none of the disciples could even come close to catching. Speeding off into the distance, he continued to munch on the bone until it was gone. The disciple with the disheveled hair started to grow faint at the thought of Elder Lee's rage when he didn't return the bone. With a howl of fury, he shot off after Bruiser. He wasn't the only one. Hundreds of enraged disciples began to chase Bruiser, and yet, none of them were fast enough. They could only watch with wide eyes as he sped toward Irispetal Peak. Even as the crowd chased after him, a cold snort suddenly echoed out like thunder. The Peak Lord of Irispetal Peak, the old woman, appeared. Coldly staring at the hundreds of disciples, she said, "What shocking behavior. Look at all of you, scaring poor little Bruiser half to death. Seems to me you people need something better to do to occupy your time." The disciples shivered and clasped hands in greeting. As for Bruiser, he cowered behind the old lady, looking very charming with his wide eyes as he rubbed against her leg. The disciples raged inwardly, but none of them dared to say a single thing. Their hatred for Bruiser continued to rise to new heights. So what if he ate a few things here and there? The old woman continued. Big deal. Whatever he ate, I'll compensate for. Now get out of here and stop bullying Bruiser. After giving the disciples a final glare, the old woman looked down kindly at Bruiser and pet him on the head. Bruiser responded by looking even more charming than usual. He even licked her hand like a puppy might. The disciples could only grit their teeth in their anger. In their minds, they weren't bullying Bruiser, he was bullying them. However, considering that a Peak Lord was siding with him, there was nothing they could do. They could only swallow their anger and give up any thoughts of causing any trouble. Of course, their fury was quickly transplanted onto Bai Xiaochun. It's all Bai Xiaochun's fault. He's the one who created this abominable battle beast. This battle beast is repulsive. Fine, steal bras, pilfer our food. The female disciples are the same as the elders and the Peak Lords. They spoil that thing to death. In the middle of his meditation, Bai Xiaochun suddenly sneezed. Opening his eyes, he looked around for a moment before going back to his breathing exercises. As for his cultivation base, it was inching ever closer to the great circle of the 10th level of qi condensation. Another month passed, and Bruiser's behavior only continued to get worse. The male disciples that had provoked Bai Xiaochun in the past were all going crazy, and yet, were completely incapable of doing anything about the situation. That was around the time that Bai Xiaochun's cultivation base eventually entered the great circle of the 10th level of qi condensation. Apparently, he had reached a barrier that would be very difficult to pass. The only thing left is foundation establishment, he thought, taking a deep breath, his eyes shining with anticipation. Foundation establishment was divided into a few different types: mortal string, earth string, and the legendary heaven string, all of which added different amounts of longevity, to be specific, 100 years, 200 years, and 500 years respectively. Bai Xiaochun had never even considered the possibility of reaching heaven string foundation establishment, considering there was almost no chance of it happening. In the entire 10,000-year history of the Spirit Stream sect, only a handful of people had ever reached Heaven String Foundation establishment, and had only done so by randomly acquiring some Heaven String energy. Generally speaking, most people reach Mortal String, which requires a Foundation Establishment pill. Earth String Foundation Establishment requires Earth String energy. Of course, even Earthstring Foundation establishment is divided up into strong and weak. It all depends on the very moment of reaching Foundation establishment and how many tide flows occur within one's spiritual sea. At the very least there will be 1, and at the most, 9. And then there's my fleshly body power. I'm already at the point of being able to make contact with the first shackle. Whether I make a breakthrough with my undying gold skin, or use the power of the dragon mammoth sea forming scripture, I should be able to break through that shackle. If I break through with both of those methods, who knows how powerful I'll be. From what Bai Xiaochun remembered, Foundation establishment pills could be purchased with merit points from the sect. They came at a hefty price, but considering how much he had saved up, he could afford them if he wanted. But he wasn't willing to do such a thing. After all, Mortal String Foundation establishment, also known as Mortal Dao, only added 100 years of longevity. After some more thought, Bai Xiaochun produced a transmission jade slip and then sent a message to Li Qinghao asking for some more information about Earth String energy. It didn't take long before the jade slip lit up with soft light as Li Qinghao returned his message. Bai Xiaochun immediately sent some spiritual power into the jade slip, whereupon Li Qinghao's voice began to echo in his mind. I'd originally planned to wait a bit longer before telling you this, but in 3 months, 150 people from the North Bank and 100 people from the South Bank, all of them inner sect disciples in the 10th level of Qi condensation, will gather at the Grand Hall on Mount Daoseed. The reason is that the 3 Foundation establishment Holy Lands will be opened. As for you, you will be going to the Fallen Sword Abyss, where you will compete with everyone else to acquire Earthstring energy, and then use it to reach Earthstring Foundation establishment. If you succeed, you will acquire an additional 200 years of longevity. That will be a major step for you as you pursue your dream of living forever. A tremor ran through Bai Xiaochun as he looked at the jade slip, panting. Earthstring Foundation establishment can add 200 years of longevity. His eyes glittered with longing for a moment, but then he hesitated. Competing with everyone else will definitely involve fierce fighting. But that's 200 years we're talking about. He continued to struggle with the matter, his obsession with being able to live forever causing his eyes to rapidly become bloodshot. Bai Xiaochun wasn't the only chosen to be given advance notice about what was to come. So soon, the news about the 3 Foundation establishment Holy Lands being opened spread throughout the North and South Banks. The 3 Foundation establishment Holy Lands were the Fallen Sword Abyss, the Lone Hell Pocket Realm, and the Primordial Spirit Hollow. Once per 60-year cycle, they would be simultaneously opened, and that time was now at hand. Of course, the Spirit Stream sect wasn't the only sect qualified to send people into the 3 Holy Lands. All 4 of the strongest sects in the cultivation world of the eastern lower reaches would send disciples. The Spirit Stream sect was only one of those 4 major sects. The Fallen Sword Abyss was considered the best of the 3 Holy Lands, with the Lone Hell Pocket Realm and the Primordial Spirit Hollow being secondary. The reason for the Holy Lands being ranked in that way was that, according to the legends, the Fallen Sword Abyss contained a strand of heaven string energy. These legends had been around for a long time, but on all the occasions in which the Fallen Sword Abyss had been opened, never once had anyone acquired any heaven string energy. The competition for Earth String energy would be a blood-soaked fight in which only the fittest survived. The discussions about the 3 Foundation establishment Holy Lands spread far and wide on both the North and South Banks. All of the inner sect disciples in the 10th level of Qi condensation were talking about it with complete and utter excitement. It's definitely going to be bloody carnage in there. Of the people who qualified to compete for Earthstring Foundation establishment, quite a few die. By the way, I heard that for the first time, the 4 sects are all going to be formally competing against each other. The number of people from a given sect who succeed in reaching Earthstring Foundation establishment will affect how many people get sent in the next time. This isn't fair. The difference between Mortal String and Earthstring is huge. Earthstring Foundation establishment can totally crush Mortal String. They're on completely different levels. Of course, there were some who got nervous because of the stories about the violent and bloody fighting which went on inside. Some of them preferred the safety of Mortal Dao Foundation establishment over the additional hundreds of years of longevity and the glory of being able to crush people below them. 3 months later at dawn, the solemn tolling of bells could be heard on Mount Daoseed. The 7 peak lords of the mountain peaks flew through the air with dignified expressions on their faces, each one of them followed by dozens of disciples. Everywhere else in the sect, disciples looked up to watch the people flying through the air toward Mount Deoseed. All of those people were so well known that the other disciples could identify them by name. From the north bank came Baihan Lai, Shu Song, Gongsun Waner, Baihan Feng, Gongsun Yun, and in the lead position, surrounded by swirling black mist, Ghost Fong. A similar scene could be seen on the south bank, as the disciples of Green Crest Peak, Fragrant Cloud Peak, and Violet Cauldron Peak all looked excitedly up into the air. Xu Baosai was among them, eagerly clutching a notebook to record everything that was happening. Shangguan Tianyu was clearly more powerful than he had been in the past. He looked like an unsheathed sword, glittering with blinding light as he flew along. Zhou Xinqi was surrounded by a swirling blue glow and a powerful life force. There was also Lu Tinlei, who was like a thunderbolt that could rip apart the heavens. In addition to them were other long-time inner sect disciples, all of whom wore solemn expressions as they followed the three South Bank Peak Lords. The elders of both banks, as well as other qualified disciples, were all discussing the matter. The North Bank gets 150 people and the South Bank gets 100. I wonder how many of them will rise to the top in the fighting with the other three sects, and eventually reach Earthstring Foundation establishment? Of course, some of them will never return. The path of cultivation is soaked with blood, and is ruled by the law of the jungle. I heard one of the senior members of my clan say that whenever the three Foundation establishment holy lands are opened, there's always blood and carnage. To some people, the main point isn't reaching Foundation establishment, it's killing the members of the other three sects. It's like a war between the four great sects that comes around once every 60-year cycle. But why are we just sending our chosen to be killed? I know that Earthstring energy can't be stored up and used later, but Mortal Tao Foundation establishment is so much safer. It might be weaker, but at least there wouldn't be so many deaths. HMPH. If you have one generation filled with weaklings, then everyone after them will also be weaklings. If that happened, the Spirit Stream sect would definitely be wiped out sooner or later. None of the four great sects will avoid the fighting, not as long as they have even one disciple who they think can reach Earthstring Foundation establishment. If one generation of disciples is weak, then the sect's power in the area will weaken, and outer forces would become a big threat. It would cause a huge headache. A perfect example is the Pill Stream sect. Long ago, they avoided the fighting 3 times in a row. But then their overall battle prowess dropped. After that, powerful warlords rose up in the sect's territory and started establishing their own little fiefdoms. Our Spirit Stream sect even managed to occupy about 20% of their former territory. Their hand was forced, and after joining the fighting again, they managed to get some Earthstring Foundation establishment disciples. Of course, a lot of other disciples died in the process, but at least they were able to get things back to the status quo. Soon, the disciples from both banks were landing outside the Grand Hall on Mount Deoseed, led by their respective peak lords. Everyone had very solemn expressions on their faces. All of the disciples were aware that their next destination would be one filled with both opportunity and bloodshed. They looked around at each other, measuring each other up. Soon, everyone was shocked to find that one certain person was missing. Bai Xiaochun isn't coming? They weren't the only ones to be surprised. The 7 peak lords stood there thoughtfully, looking in the direction of the Beast Conservatory on the north bank. Li Qinghao's expression was the same as ever. He was confident in his analysis of Bai Xiaochun, and was sure that although he was naughty, mischievous, and fearful of death, his obsession with living forever would win out in the end. In the Beast Conservatory, Bai Xiaochun sat there listening to the bells ringing. After a long moment of thought, he gritted his teeth and rose to his feet. During the past 3 months, he had focused completely on cultivation. He had spent massive amounts of merit points to get over 1,000 paper amulets, leaving him armed to the teeth. He had also worked hard to achieve a breakthrough with his undying silver skin. Unfortunately, although he made some progress, he never achieved the breakthrough. His bags were packed, and he was ready to go. He refused to allow Bruiser to come along, as he wasn't ready for such an event. Stepping onto the golden crow sword, he shot through the air toward Mount Deoseed. On the way, he stopped by the Spirit Stone Pavilion, where he spent some more merit points on Earth Flame crystals, which he could use as a substitute for actual Earth Flame, and be able to concoct medicine anywhere he wanted. At the moment, his eyes were completely bloodshot. Although he had made his decision quite some time ago, he always liked to be absolutely prepared. Therefore, he had spent a lot of time poring through the ancient records, and had learned about how brutal and bloody the Foundation establishment Holy Lands were. He also knew that it was a chance for the sects to show off their might to the others. The more he came to understand the whole thing, the more his heart trembled. That was especially true when he read about how 800 years ago, only about 10 disciples returned to the Spirit Stream sect from the fallen sword abyss. The brutality of that event left Bai Xiaochun completely shaken. Of course, that was an isolated incident. According to the records, the barbarity of that instance 800 years in the past was because a terrifying chosen rose up from the Bloodstream sect. He was known as Master Limitless, and he crushed everything in his path. It wasn't just the Spirit Stream sect who suffered heavy casualties, all of the other 3 sects did. Virtually all of the disciples of that generation in the other 3 sects were wiped out, and that was how the Bloodstream sect had surpassed the Profound Stream sect to become the top force among the 4 great sects. As for that Master Limitless, he was now known as Patriarch Limitless of the Bloodstream sect. On the other occasions in which the 3 Foundation establishment Holy Lands were opened, the casualties weren't so horrific. At the very most, half of the disciples might die. Even for those who didn't reach Earthstring Foundation establishment, as long as they were careful, it was possible to make it out alive. Even still, a casualty rate of 50% left Bai Xiaochun shaking in fear. He really wanted to pass up the opportunity, and simply settle for the safe bet of Mortal Tao Foundation establishment and its extra 100 years of longevity. However, his dream was not to live for an extra 100 years. He wanted to live forever. I want more than 100 years. I want forever. After looking through the ancient records, he left with bloodshot eyes, even more clear about how Foundation establishment worked. The most telling factor was that from ancient times until now, not a single Mortal Tao Foundation establishment cultivator had ever reached the Gold Core stage. If he wanted to cultivate all the way to Gold Core, he had to reach Earthstring Foundation establishment. Even the lowest level of the Gold Core stage added far more longevity than Foundation establishment. Obviously, the higher one's cultivation base, the greater one's chances of living forever. I could avoid this situation, but 100 years later, how could I possibly avoid dying? At that time, wouldn't I regret not taking the chance to reach Earthstring Foundation establishment? During the past 3 months, Bai Xiaochun had wrestled with the problem over and over again. In the end, he reached a state of bedeviled madness. Gritting his teeth, he finally made his decision. "I'll do anything to be able to live forever," he shouted as he stepped onto the golden crow sword and shot toward Mount Deoseed. Shortly after the other disciples converged, he appeared. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.